I am Erica, 34 years old, and I never thought I would have to kick my own mother out of my house. But there I was, lying helpless in my bed after a car accident that left me with broken bones and a shattered sense of family. My mom, Barbara, and stepfather, Harold, had moved in to take care of me. But 3 weeks into my recovery, I heard the words that changed everything. "We are not your damn servants," my mother snapped, while I lay in pain, unable to even reach my medication in the house I had worked so hard to pay for. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control, no matter how much it hurt. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Have you ever felt betrayed by the very people who should have had your back? Hit like and subscribe if you want to hear how I discovered a shocking truth that changed everything after I kicked them out. I always prided myself on being self-made. After graduating with my architecture degree, I threw myself into my career with everything I had. 12-hour days, weekends at the drafting table, and countless cups of coffee became my life for nearly a decade. By the time I turned 30, I had worked my way up to senior architect at one of the most prestigious firms in Boston. My colleagues often joked that I was married to my blueprints, and they weren't entirely wrong. While my friends were settling down and starting families, I was saving every penny I could. All that hard work finally paid off 3 years ago when I purchased my dream home. It sits on a quiet street in a beautiful suburb with large oak trees lining the driveway and enough space in the backyard for the garden I had always wanted. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen with marble countertops, and my absolute favorite part, a home office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small pond. It cost nearly all of my savings, but every time I turned the key in the lock, I felt a sense of accomplishment that made it all worthwhile. My relationship with my mother, Barbara, has always been complicated. She raised me alone after my father walked out when I was just 4 years old. Growing up, we moved from apartment to apartment as she struggled to make ends meet working 2 jobs. I cannot deny that she sacrificed a lot for me, but her love always came with conditions and expectations that felt impossible to meet. When I was 16, she married Harold, my stepfather. He was a quiet man who mostly went along with whatever my mother wanted. He owned a small plumbing business that did okay, but he never seemed particularly ambitious or interested in much beyond watching sports and drinking beer. Their relationship seemed to work because he rarely challenged her, and she got to make all the decisions. From the beginning, money was a constant source of tension between my mother and me. No matter how much I achieved or how hard I worked, she would make comments about how I was throwing money away on education or my career aspirations. When I got scholarships for college, instead of being proud, she questioned why I couldn't just get a job at the local factory like my cousin Alice had done. "Real people work with their hands, Erica," she would say. "All those fancy books won't feed you when the economy crashes." Despite her discouragement, I persisted. Once I began making good money, I made sure to help her and Harold financially. I paid off the remaining mortgage on their modest house, bought them a reliable car when their old one finally died, and set up a monthly transfer to supplement their retirement savings. I never expected gratitude, but it did hurt that she seemed to take my help for granted, never once saying thank you. My brother Tom was the only one who truly understood the dynamic. 2 years older than me, he had left home at 18 and rarely came back. He settled in California, married a kind woman named Diane, and started his own landscaping business. We stayed in touch with occasional phone calls, but he kept his distance from our mother. The few times he visited her always ended in arguments about his abandonment of the family. "You always were too sensitive," my mother would tell him. "Some of us have to stay and deal with real life instead of running away to the beach." I often found myself caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both of them while also building my own life. When I bought my house, my mother's reaction was predictably mixed. "It's too big for just one person," she said during her first visit, "and this neighborhood seems so pretentious. All these people probably look down on regular folks like us." I had learned long ago to let these comments slide off my back. I smiled and showed her around anyway, hoping she might eventually see it through my eyes, as the culmination of years of hard work and dreams. Harold wandered through the rooms, opening cabinets and checking the water pressure in the bathrooms like he was conducting an inspection. "Plumbing seems decent," was his highest praise. Little did I know that this house, my sanctuary and greatest achievement, would become the battlefield for the biggest confrontation of our already strained relationship. The night of the accident remains a blur in my memory. It was raining heavily, the kind of summer storm that turns roads into rivers within minutes. I was driving home from a late meeting with clients, my mind already halfway into bed after an exhausting 14-hour workday. The intersection was just 2 miles from my house. I remember the bright headlights coming from my right, the screech of tires on wet asphalt, and then the sickening crunch as my car spun out of control and slammed into a utility pole. I woke up in the hospital with a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a shattered right femur, and a fractured wrist. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. Surgery to repair my leg required the insertion of a metal rod and several screws. The recovery would be long and painful, they warned me. I would need at least 8 weeks of complete bed rest, followed by months of physical therapy, before I could even think about returning to work normally. "You're going to need help," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "Is there someone who can stay with you? Family, perhaps?" My first thought was to hire a professional caregiver. I had the savings and good health insurance, but when my mother heard about the accident, she immediately insisted on coming to help. "What kind of mother would I be if I let strangers take care of my daughter?" she said over the phone. "Harold and I will move in temporarily. We can stay in one of your spare bedrooms." I hesitated. The thought of my mother taking over my house filled me with dread, but I was in no position to argue. The pain medication made it difficult to think clearly, and the logistics of arranging professional care seemed overwhelming. Plus, a small part of me hoped this might be an opportunity for us to connect in a way we never had before. Maybe in taking care of me, she would finally see me as the daughter she could be proud of. "Okay," I agreed reluctantly, "but just until I can manage on my own." The first week was almost pleasant. My mother cooked meals, helped me to the bathroom, and made sure I took my medication on schedule. Harold set up a small television in my bedroom so I could watch my favorite shows, and fixed a loose handrail on the staircase that I had been meaning to address for months. They brought me books from the library and kept the house reasonably tidy. I began to think I had misjudged them, that perhaps this arrangement would work out after all. But as the days stretched into the second week, subtle changes began to occur. My mother started complaining about the ridiculous layout of my kitchen, rearranging my carefully organized cabinets to suit her preferences. She criticized my food choices, insisting that her homemade soup would heal me faster than the organic meals I had delivered. "You waste so much money on these fancy foods," she scolded while unpacking a grocery delivery. $10 for a tiny container of berries. Highway robbery. Harold, meanwhile, had discovered my wine collection and helped himself to a bottle of my most expensive Cabernet one evening, without asking. When I mentioned it the next morning, my mother dismissed my concern with a wave of her hand. "He works hard taking care of this big house all day," she said. "He deserves a little relaxation." The taking care apparently consisted of watching sports in my living room with his feet up on my coffee table, leaving rings from his beer cans on the hand-carved wood. He used my premium shower products, left wet towels on the bathroom floor, and adjusted the thermostat to a temperature that left me shivering in my bedroom. Small arguments erupted over household expenses. Though they had moved into my home, they made no offer to contribute to the suddenly higher utility bills or groceries. When I gently suggested they might help with some of these costs, my mother looked offended. "We left our comfortable home to come take care of you," she said sharply. "I think that's contribution enough, don't you?" I tried to be understanding. After all, they had put their lives on hold to help me. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that their presence was less about helping me and more about taking advantage of the situation. I overheard phone conversations where my mother bragged to her friends about staying in Erica's luxury house and describing my belongings as if they were partly hers by extension. The breaking point of that second week came when I asked for my laptop so I could check in with work. My boss had been understanding about my situation, but expected me to stay connected remotely when possible. My mother brought the computer, but hovered as I typed emails, reading over my shoulder and commenting on my rude tone to colleagues. "You young people have no idea how to communicate properly," she said. "No wonder you're still single." I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I needed their help. For now, I would have to endure the small indignities. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind warned me that things were only going to get worse. By the third week after my accident, my home no longer felt like my own. My mother and Harold had completely taken over every space except my bedroom, and even that sanctuary was regularly invaded without knocking. My carefully curated home, once a testament to my taste and achievements, had been transformed into something unrecognizable. One Tuesday afternoon, I was awakened from a pain medication-induced nap by loud laughter and unfamiliar voices. Dragging myself painfully to my bedroom door, I discovered that my mother had invited 3 of her friends over for what appeared to be a regular card game. They had set up at my dining table, the one I had special ordered from an artisan woodworker, and were drinking my expensive tea from my grandmother's china cups. "Oh, Erica, you're up," my mother said, not bothering to introduce me to her friends, who eyed me curiously in my pajamas and disheveled state. "We're just having a little get-together. Go back to rest if you want." I felt like a stranger in my own home, dismissed to my room like a child while adults took over the house. Later, when I confronted my mother about inviting people over without asking me first, she seemed genuinely perplexed by my objection. "It's not like you're using the dining room," she said dismissively. "Besides, these are my oldest friends. They wanted to see where I was staying." The sense of invasion extended beyond social gatherings. One morning, I noticed that my jewelry box had been moved from its usual spot on my dresser. When I opened it, I discovered that several pieces had been rearranged, and a pair of pearl earrings my grandmother had given me were missing. I found them later in the guest bathroom, casually left by the sink. "I just borrowed them for church," my mother explained when I questioned her. "They match my sweater perfectly. I figured you wouldn't mind, since you're not going anywhere." More disturbing was when I caught Harold in my home office rummaging through my desk drawers. He claimed he was looking for stamps, but I later discovered that some cash I kept in a hidden compartment had decreased by $100. When I mentioned this, both he and my mother acted deeply offended that I would even imply they had taken anything. "After all we've done for you," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes, "how could you accuse us of stealing?" The manipulation was textbook, making me question whether I had miscounted the money or was being paranoid due to the medication. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. Perhaps the most alarming incident occurred when I overheard a late-night conversation between them in the kitchen below my bedroom. I had been having trouble sleeping due to pain and was about to call down for assistance when their words froze me in place. "We could stay here indefinitely," my mother was saying. "Erica makes more than enough money to support all of us, and this house has plenty of room." "What if she wants us to leave once she's better?" Harold asked. "She won't," my mother replied confidently. "I'm already looking into what rights we have as caregivers. In some states, after a certain period, you can't just kick family out. Besides, she's always had a guilty conscience about putting her career before family. I can work with that." I lay in bed, stunned by what I had heard. They weren't planning to help me temporarily. They were plotting to move in permanently to take advantage of my injury and financial stability for their own gain. The betrayal cut deep, especially coming from the woman who had raised me, who should have been proud of my independence rather than seeking to undermine it. The situation with food became another battleground. Because of my limited mobility, I had arranged for healthy meal deliveries, clearly labeled with my name and the dates they should be eaten. Yet repeatedly, I would find my containers empty when I asked for them to be brought up. "Oh, we thought those were for all of us," my mother would say innocently. "You order so much food. How are we supposed to know?" Despite the clear labels, despite my explanations, despite the fact that I was paying for everything. The final financial straw came when I received my utility bills for the month. My electricity usage had nearly tripled, and the water bill was double its usual amount. Harold took hour-long showers twice daily, left lights on in every room, and had the air conditioning running at maximum, even when the weather was mild. When I asked them to be more mindful of usage or to contribute to the increased costs, my mother looked at me as if I had asked her to sell a kidney. "We left our house with all utilities turned off to save you money by coming here," she said indignantly. "Do you have any idea how much you'd be paying for a professional nurse? Thousands. We're saving you money by being here." The fact that I was still working remotely despite my condition seemed to escape her notice. Though in considerable pain, I forced myself to log in for conference calls and review designs from my bed, determined not to let my team down or lose my position at the firm. My mother saw this as an opportunity to interrupt constantly, bringing me tea I hadn't asked for or rearranging my pillows during important client meetings. When I asked for some privacy during work hours, she launched into a tirade about ungrateful children these days who don't appreciate their parents' sacrifices. "In my day, we respected our elders," she said, loud enough for my colleagues to hear over the video call. "We didn't hide in our rooms with fancy computers while our poor mothers slaved away downstairs." I muted the call, mortified, and tried to explain that this was my livelihood at stake. Her response was to roll her eyes and mutter something about priorities as she left the room, slamming the door hard enough to make me wince in pain. By the end of the third week, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. What had started as a well-intentioned arrangement had devolved into a power struggle that I was losing simply because of my physical limitations. I began to dread asking for help, trying to manage my pain and needs alone rather than face my mother's increasingly bitter comments or Harold's sullen compliance. Something would have to give, and soon. I just didn't realize how explosive the breaking point would be. The night that everything finally came to a head began like many others during my recovery, with pain that woke me from a restless sleep. My ribs ached with every breath, and my leg throbbed beneath its cast despite the medication I had taken before bed. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 in the morning, and my next dose of pain medication wasn't due until 3. I tried to reposition myself to find some relief, but every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my body. Finally, desperate for any comfort, I decided to try to reach the extra pillow that had fallen to the floor. As I stretched toward it, a sharp pain shot through my side, and I involuntarily cried out. The house remained silent. No footsteps hurrying up the stairs, no concerned voices calling my name. I could hear the faint sound of the television from downstairs, indicating that someone was still awake. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the call bell the hospital had provided me, pressing it several times. Still nothing. "Mom!" I called out, my voice strained. "Harold, can someone help me, please?" After waiting another excruciating 5 minutes with no response, I realized I would have to get the medication myself. With painstaking effort, I maneuvered my casted leg off the bed and reached for the crutches leaning against the wall. The simple act of standing made me dizzy, and I had to pause, leaning heavily on the furniture for support. The journey down the hallway to the stairs was slow and perilous, each step with the crutches pulled at my broken ribs, sending sharp pains through my chest. By the time I reached the top of the staircase, I was covered in sweat and fighting tears. Going downstairs with crutches and a full leg cast is dangerous under the best circumstances. In the middle of the night, in pain, it was nearly impossible. I sat down on the top step and began the humiliating process of scooting down one stair at a time, dragging my cast behind me. Halfway down, I could clearly hear the television now, some late-night talk show, and see the blue light flickering in the living room. I could also make out my mother and Harold both awake, her knitting, while he flipped through a magazine. "Hello," I called out again, louder this time. "I need some help." My mother finally looked up, seemingly annoyed at the interruption. "What are you doing out of bed?" she asked, making no move to assist me. "I'm in pain," I explained, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. I called for help, but no one came. I need my medication from the kitchen. Harold glanced up briefly before returning to his magazine. My mother sighed dramatically, as if I had asked her to climb Mount Everest rather than walk to the kitchen. "Can it wait until morning? We were just about to go to bed." The casual dismissal of my pain, the complete lack of concern, stunned me momentarily. These were the people who were supposed to be caring for me, who had insisted on moving into my home for that very purpose. "No, it can't wait," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "I'm in pain now. The medication is in the kitchen, on the counter, where it always is. Please." With another exaggerated sigh, my mother put down her knitting and stood up. But instead of coming to help me down the remaining stairs or fetching the medication, she launched into a tirade. "You know, Erica, you've become so demanding since your accident. Everything has to be exactly when and how you want it. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be at your beck and call 24 hours a day? We haven't had a full night's sleep in weeks because of your constant needs." I sat there on the stairs in pain and disbelief as she continued. "We left our comfortable home to come help you. We've cooked your meals, cleaned your house, driven you to doctor appointments, and what thanks do we get? Complaints about how we load the dishwasher or what television shows we watch." Harold nodded along, adding, "We're not spring chickens, you know. Running up and down these stairs all day takes a toll." The injustice of their complaints, when they had been doing the bare minimum while living rent-free in my home, eating my food, using my utilities without contribution, made something snap inside me. The weeks of built-up frustration and hurt boiled over. "If it's such a burden to help me," I said, my voice shaking, "then why did you insist on coming? I wanted to hire a professional caregiver, someone who would actually, provide care." My mother's face darkened. "Oh, of course. Throw money at the problem instead of letting family help. That's always been your solution, hasn't it? As if your fancy job and big house make you better than us." "This isn't about money or status," I countered, still stranded halfway down the stairs. This is about basic consideration. I'm injured. I need help. That's the only reason you're here. Well, maybe we should just leave then, she threatened, though we both knew they had no intention of giving up their comfortable arrangement. See how you manage on your own. Maybe you should, I replied, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded, because right now I'm not seeing how you're helping at all. That's when she exploded, her face contorted with a rage I had rarely seen before. We are not your damn servants, she shouted, jabbing a finger in my direction. Just because you pay for everything doesn't mean you get to order us around in your fancy house. We deserve respect. After everything I sacrificed to raise you, this is how you repay me, with demands and ingratitude? The word sacrifice triggered a memory of something that had been bothering me for days. I had noticed unusual charges on my credit card statement that morning. Purchases at stores I never frequented in amounts that suggested more than just groceries or household necessities. Speaking of payment, I said quietly, would either of you like to explain the charges on my credit card from Nordstrom and Best Buy? Charges I didn't make? The sudden silence was deafening. Harold became intensely interested in his magazine while my mother's expression flickered between shock and defiance. We needed a few things, she finally said, her tone defensive. You said we should make ourselves at home. I didn't say you should help yourselves to my credit card, I replied, incredulous. That's stealing, Mom. It is not stealing, she shot back. We are family. What's yours is ours. That's how it's always worked. No, that's how you've always wanted it to work, I corrected her, taking from me while giving nothing back. Harold finally spoke up, his voice carrying a warning. Watch yourself, Erica. Your mother has done everything for you. We deserve a little comfort after all we've given up to be here. Something in his tone, the entitled assumption that my possessions were somehow owed to them, made my decision crystal clear. This wasn't going to get better. They weren't going to change. And I couldn't heal, physically or emotionally, with them in my house. I want you both out, I said, the words hanging in the air between us. Not tomorrow, not next week, tomorrow. My mother laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. You can't be serious. You can't even get down the stairs by yourself. You need us. No, I replied, finding strength I didn't know I had. What I need is peace in my own home. What I need is respect for my boundaries. What I need is people who actually care about my well-being instead of what they can get from me. And clearly, that's not you two. The look of shock on their faces would have been almost comical under different circumstances. They had never expected me to stand up to them, to draw a line and enforce it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother uttered the words that confirmed I was making the right decision. We deserve this house more than you do. After all I've done to raise you, you owe us. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades. In her mind, my achievements weren't sources of pride, but resources to be tapped, possessions to be claimed. My success wasn't a credit to her parenting, but a debt I owed her, one that could never fully be repaid. The only thing I owe you now, I said, somehow finding the strength to continue down the stairs despite the pain, is notice to vacate, which I'm giving you right now. That night, after retrieving my own medication and painstakingly making my way back upstairs, I sat in my bed with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks, despite the physical pain. The confrontation had been terrible, but it had also been necessary. For too long, I had allowed my mother and Harold to take advantage of my generosity and guilt, to manipulate me with references to sacrifices made decades ago, no more. Sleep eluded me as I planned my next steps. My injuries made me vulnerable, but I wasn't helpless. First thing in the morning, I called Jessica, my best friend since college, and also, conveniently, a family law attorney. They did what? She exclaimed, after I explained the situation. Erica, that's financial abuse. Using your credit card without permission is illegal, regardless of your relationship. I know, I sighed, but I don't want to press charges. I just want them out of my house before they do more damage. Jessica walked me through my options. Since my mother and Harold had been staying with me for less than 30 days, in most jurisdictions they weren't technically tenants with full legal protections. I could legally ask them to leave immediately, though Jessica recommended giving them a short, defined period to make arrangements. Document everything, she advised. The credit card charges, any missing items, the conversations where they expressed intentions to stay permanently. If they refuse to leave, we can get a formal eviction process started, but hopefully it won't come to that. My next call was to a home health care service. The agency promised to send someone the following day for an assessment and could start full-time care within 48 hours. The cost was significant, but my health insurance would cover part of it, and frankly, my mental well-being was worth every penny. Armed with information and alternatives, I drafted a formal letter on my laptop. It stated clearly that Barbara and Harold needed to vacate my property within 48 hours, listed the unauthorized credit card charges with a request for repayment, and specified that I had arranged for professional care. I printed 3 copies, signed them all, and prepared myself for the confrontation I knew would follow. They were in the kitchen when I made my way downstairs around noon, Harold reading a newspaper at my breakfast bar while my mother aggressively chopped vegetables, the knife hitting the cutting board with unnecessary force. The tension from last night still hung heavy in the air. "I have something for you," I said, placing the letters on the counter between us. "This is formal notice that you need to leave my home within 48 hours. My mother stopped chopping and stared at me in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I've arranged for professional health care starting tomorrow. Your services are no longer needed or wanted." Harold picked up one of the letters, his face darkening as he read. "You're billing us for the credit card charges, after all we've done for you?" "Yes," I said simply. "Taking someone's credit card without permission is theft, Harold. I'm being generous by not involving the police." My mother's face flushed with anger. "This is how you treat family? Throwing us out like garbage when we've been taking care of you day and night?" "Is that what you call it, taking care of me?" I asked. "You ignored me when I needed help last night. You've been using my home as your personal hotel, spending my money without permission, and planning to take advantage of my injury to move in permanently. That's not care, Mom. That's exploitation." "How dare you?" she sputtered, tears springing to her eyes. The familiar manipulation tactic, crying to make me feel guilty, didn't work this time. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is the thanks I get?" "I've thanked you plenty," I replied calmly. "I paid off your mortgage. I bought you a car. I set up a retirement fund for you both. I've been financially supporting you for years without complaint. But this, moving into my home and treating me like an inconvenience in it, crosses a line I can't ignore." Harold stood up, attempting to look intimidating despite being shorter than me. "We're not going anywhere. You need us. You can barely walk. Who's going to take care of you?" "I've hired professionals," I repeated. "People who will actually help me instead of helping themselves to my possessions." "Professional strangers who don't love you like we do," my mother countered, changing tactics from anger to concern. "What if something happens to you? What if you fall? Do you think some hired help will care about you the way your own mother does?" "At this point, yes, I absolutely do," I answered honestly. "Love doesn't take without asking. Love doesn't ignore calls for help. Love doesn't see a daughter's success as something to exploit." The next hour was exhausting. They cycled through every manipulation strategy in their arsenal: anger, tears, guilt, threats, bargaining. My mother claimed I was mentally unstable due to medication and couldn't make rational decisions. Harold suggested they could stay, but would be more helpful going forward, as if the problem was simply that they hadn't done enough chores. When none of that worked, my mother tried a new approach. "If we leave, we're never coming back," she threatened. "Is that what you want? To cut off your only family?" The question gave me pause, not because I feared losing them, but because I realized their presence in my life had become more burden than blessing. What kind of relationship did we really have if it was built on obligation rather than mutual respect and genuine care? "If that's your choice," I finally said, "I'll accept it, but you're leaving either way." When it became clear that I wouldn't budge, their tactics turned darker. Harold began packing their belongings with deliberate roughness, slamming drawers and doors. My mother started listing all the things she had done for me since childhood, as if raising your child was a transaction that demanded repayment forever. "I could have had a career," she said bitterly. "I could have traveled the world. Instead, I was stuck with a child who never appreciated anything I did." Her words hurt, but they also confirmed what I had long suspected, that she resented me on some level, that she saw her maternal role as a sacrifice rather than a choice she had made willingly. It explained so much about our relationship, about why my success seemed to anger her rather than make her proud. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly, "but that was your choice, Mom, and this is mine." They refused to leave that day, insisting they needed more time to arrange transportation and find somewhere to go. I allowed them to stay the night, but made it clear that I expected them gone by the following evening. To ensure they understood I was serious, I called a locksmith to schedule a lock change for the day after their departure, and made the call within their hearing. That night, I heard them moving around downstairs long after I had gone to bed, drawers opening and closing, hushed arguments, the occasional thump of something heavy being moved. I tried not to worry about what they might be taking, telling myself that possessions could be replaced. My peace of mind and self-respect were far more valuable. The home healthcare nurse arrived the next morning as scheduled. Lisa was in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that immediately put me at ease. She assessed my condition, reviewed my medication schedule, and outlined how she and her colleague would split shifts to ensure I had 24-hour care until I was more mobile. My mother watched this interaction with narrowed eyes, interjecting occasionally with comments about how strangers can't possibly know your needs like family does. Lisa handled the situation with professional grace, neither engaging with the hostility nor showing discomfort. As the departure deadline approached, the tension in the house became unbearable. Harold loaded their suitcases and boxes into their car while my mother made one final attempt to change my mind. "You'll regret this," she said, standing in the doorway of my bedroom. "When you're all alone with some nurse who's only here for a paycheck, you'll wish you had your mother." I looked at her, this woman who had given me life, but also spent years making me feel I was never quite good enough, never quite deserving of unconditional love. In that moment, I felt sad for her, for the bitterness that seemed to consume her, for her inability to simply be happy for her daughter's achievements. "I might," I conceded, "but I doubt it. Goodbye, Mom." She left without another word, slamming the front door so hard that the windows rattled. Through my bedroom window, I watched them drive away, Harold's face set in a scowl, my mother staring straight ahead. I waited for the wave of regret or guilt to hit me, but instead I felt only relief and curiosity about what exactly they had taken with them during those late-night packing sessions. I was about to find out, and what I discovered would change my understanding of my family forever. The first few days after my mother and Harold left were blissfully peaceful. Lisa and her colleague Marcus provided the professional care I needed without the emotional manipulation I had endured for weeks. They helped me with medication, physical therapy exercises, meal preparation, and personal care, all while respecting my privacy and independence. "You seem much more relaxed," Lisa commented on her third day. "Your blood pressure has improved too." I hadn't realized how much stress my mother and Harold's presence had caused until they were gone. My pain levels seemed more manageable. My sleep improved, and I could focus on work without constant interruptions or criticism. Once I felt more stable, however, curiosity began to gnaw at me. What exactly had they been doing during those late nights before they left? What had they taken? I asked Lisa to help me conduct an inventory of the house, starting with the most obvious valuables. My grandmother's silver was still in the dining room cabinet, though several pieces appeared to be missing. The painting in the hallway, a valuable piece by a local artist, remained in place. My laptop and other electronics were untouched. But as we moved through each room, small absences began to add up. From my jewelry box, several pieces were gone. Not just the pearl earrings I had caught my mother wearing, but also a diamond pendant my first boss had given me as a graduation present, a pair of sapphire earrings I had bought to celebrate my first major project, and most distressingly, a simple gold locket that had belonged to my paternal grandmother, one of the few connections I had to my father's side of the family. In my home office, the cash from my emergency fund was completely gone. Not just the $100 I had noticed missing earlier, but the entire envelope containing nearly $2,000. Several personal documents were missing from my filing cabinet as well, including my birth certificate and social security card. "This is concerning," Lisa said, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine worry. Identity theft is a serious risk with those documents. Most troubling of all was what we found in the guest room where they had stayed. In their haste to pack, they had left behind several papers tucked between the mattress and box spring. Among them was a printout of my bank statement, one I had never given them access to, showing my savings account balance and recent transactions. There was also a partially completed application for a home equity line of credit on my house, with my forged signature at the bottom. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands shaking as I held the document. They were planning to take out a loan against my house. Lisa looked horrified. "You need to call your bank immediately, and probably the police." I made the calls, placing fraud alerts on my credit and filing a report about the stolen documents and attempted forgery. The bank assured me that no loan had been processed and that they would flag my accounts for additional security. The police took my statement but warned me that prosecuting family members was complicated and often didn't result in satisfactory outcomes. After these practical measures were taken, I sat in my living room trying to process the depth of the betrayal. These weren't just opportunistic thefts. They represented calculated, premeditated attempts to exploit my injury for significant financial gain. How long had they been planning this? Was this why they had been so eager to move in when I was injured? On an impulse, I decided to call my brother Tom. We hadn't spoken in months, our busy lives and different time zones making regular communication difficult. But now I needed someone who understood our mother, someone who might help me make sense of what had happened. Erica? Tom sounded surprised when he answered. Is everything okay? You never call in the middle of a workday. I told him everything. The accident, our mother and Harold moving in, the escalating tension, the theft, and the attempted fraud. As I spoke, I heard his breathing change, becoming heavier, angrier. I wish I could say I'm shocked, he said when I finished. But this isn't the first time they've done something like this. What do you mean? Tom sighed heavily. Do you remember Aunt Susan, Mom's cousin who had the stroke a few years ago? I vaguely recalled a distant relative who had fallen ill around the time I was starting my career. Not really. I think Mom mentioned her once or twice. Mom and Harold moved in with her too, supposedly to help her recover, Tom explained. 6 months later, Susan had signed over her cabin in Vermont to them. She died a year after that with almost nothing left to her name. Her kids were devastated and tried to contest it legally, but Susan had apparently signed everything willingly. I felt sick. So this is a pattern. I think so, Tom admitted. I've kept my distance partly because I suspected something like this was going on. They tried it with me once, right after Diane and I bought our first house. Mom hinted heavily about moving closer to us, helping with future grandchildren. When I made it clear that wasn't happening, she basically stopped speaking to me for a year. The conversation with Tom left me reeling, but also determined to understand the full extent of what had been happening in my home. Over the next few days, as my mobility improved slightly, I began a more thorough search of the house, looking for any other evidence they might have left behind. In a seldom-used hall closet, I found a small box I didn't recognize. Inside were printouts of emails between my mother and a real estate agent in Florida, discussing potential properties they could purchase once the funds come through. The most recent email mentioned a perfect beachfront condo that would be available in about 3 months. Roughly the time my doctor had estimated for my full recovery. They had been planning to use my money to fund their retirement dream home. Even more disturbing was what I found hidden in a stack of magazines in the guest room. A small notebook in my mother's handwriting. It appeared to be a diary of sorts, with entries dating back several years. Normally, I would never read someone's private journal, but given the circumstances, I felt justified in looking for answers. What I found was heartbreaking. Page after page revealed my mother's resentment toward me, her jealousy of my career success, her bitterness that I had escaped the life she felt trapped in. She wrote about how unfair it was that I had a beautiful home while she and Harold struggled with repairs on their aging house. She complained about my showing off when I paid for their car or mortgage, saying I only did it to make her feel inferior. Most shocking were the entries from right after my accident. She described it as finally an opportunity and the perfect chance to secure our future. There were calculations of how much they could potentially get from my house and savings, and notes about how to gradually take control of my finances while I was vulnerable. The last entry, dated the day before our final confrontation, read, Erica is getting suspicious. Harold says we need to move faster. If we can get the loan paperwork processed this week, we can be in Florida before she even realizes what happened. She'll be too focused on her recovery to come after us, and by then it will be too late. I set the journal down, my hands trembling. The coldness of it, the calculated exploitation of my injury, was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't impulsive bad behavior or poor boundaries. This was predatory. Needing to understand more, I dug deeper into the guest room closet and found a shoebox filled with financial documents. Not mine this time, but theirs. Bank statements showed multiple overdrawn accounts and credit card bills with minimum payments barely being met. There were also several letters from casinos addressed to Harold, offering special VIP weekends and credit lines. Another letter, this one from a collection agency, referenced ongoing gambling debts, and threatened legal action if payments weren't received soon. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Harold's gambling problem had put them in severe financial trouble, and they had seen my injury as their way out, their financial salvation. I sat on the guest room floor, surrounded by evidence of their deception, and felt an odd sense of clarity wash over me. Their behavior had never been about family, or care, or even normal human greed. It had been desperation, addiction, and the toxic resentment my mother had apparently harbored for years. For the first time since they had left, I cried, not for the loss of the relationship I had with them, but for the relationship I had always wanted and would never have. A mother who took pride in my achievements instead of seeing them as a reminder of her own perceived failures. A family based on mutual support rather than exploitation. When the tears subsided, I gathered all the evidence and locked it away in my home safe. I didn't know yet what I would do with it all, whether I would pursue legal action or simply use it as a reminder to maintain firm boundaries in the future. But I knew one thing for certain. The dynamics of my family had been permanently altered, and there was no going back to the way things were before. The discovery had changed everything. My understanding of my childhood, my perception of my mother's love, and most importantly, my willingness to accept toxic relationships in the name of family obligation. It was a painful revelation, but also a liberating one. 3 months after my mother and Harold left, my physical recovery had progressed remarkably. The cast on my leg had been replaced with a walking boot. My ribs had healed enough that deep breaths no longer caused pain, and I had gradually returned to working full-time, though still mostly from home. Lisa continued to visit 3 times a week for physical therapy sessions, but I no longer needed round-the-clock care. As my body healed, I had also begun the more difficult process of emotional recovery. With the encouragement of Lisa, who had become something of a friend as well as a caregiver, I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Winters helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of elder abuse in reverse, financial exploitation and emotional manipulation by family members who should have been sources of support. The hardest part for many people, she explained during one session, is accepting that the parent they wanted may not be the parent they have. Your mother's actions reflect her own wounds and limitations, not your worth as a daughter. Those words resonated deeply with me. For so long, I had measured my value through my mother's eyes, striving to earn approval that was perpetually withheld. Now I was learning to separate her issues from my identity, to recognize that her resentment and exploitation were about her, not me. I had maintained the no-contact boundary with my mother and Harold, changing my phone number and instructing my firm's reception not to put through their calls. They had made several attempts to contact me in the weeks after leaving. First angry messages, demanding the return of items they claimed were theirs, then manipulative pleas about family obligation, and finally, threats about telling everyone how I had abandoned my poor mother in her time of need. None of it worked. The evidence of their planned exploitation was too concrete, too undeniable for me to doubt my decision. The attempted home equity loan alone would have potentially cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and put my dream home at risk. As fall turned to winter, I found myself contemplating a more active form of closure. After discussing it extensively with Dr. Winters, I decided to arrange one final meeting with my mother, not to reconcile, but to understand, and perhaps to help her understand the consequences of her actions. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that would offer privacy for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. When she walked in, I was struck by how small she looked, how much older than when I had last seen her just months ago. She had lost weight, and her hair, usually meticulously colored and styled, showed streaks of gray. "Erica," she said, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty I had rarely heard from her. "You look well." "I am," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "My recovery is going better than expected." An awkward silence fell between us. I had invited her here, but now that we were face to face, I found it hard to begin. Finally, I decided on directness. "I found your journal," I said quietly, "and the loan application, and the emails about the Florida condo." Her face paled, but she didn't deny anything. Instead, she straightened her shoulders defensively. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Harold's business has been struggling for years. The medical bills from his back surgery last year nearly bankrupted us. That doesn't justify stealing from me, I pointed out, or trying to take out a fraudulent loan against my house. You could have asked for help, Mom. I've never refused when you needed financial assistance. Asked? Like charity? She spat the word. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to always be the one with your hand out? To watch your daughter succeed at everything while you've failed at so much? Her raw honesty caught me off guard. Is that how you see it? That my success somehow diminishes you? You've had every advantage, she continued, years of bottled resentment pouring out, opportunities I never had, and you act like it's all because you're so much smarter, so much more capable than me. I've never thought that, I said, genuinely surprised. I've always been grateful for the foundation you gave me. You taught me to work hard, to be independent. Those values made my success possible. She laughed bitterly. Nice words. But actions speak louder. You moved into that big house all alone, showing off what you could afford, while we struggled to keep our roof from leaking. I offered to help with your roof, I reminded her. You refused because it came with strings attached. My advice, my judgment about how you should live. I took a deep breath, recognizing the cycle we were falling into. This wasn't about the house, or money, or even the attempted theft. It was about something far more fundamental. Her perception that my independence was a rejection of her, that my success highlighted her perceived failures. Mom, I said gently, I think we've both been hurt by expectations that were never clearly communicated. I wanted your approval. You wanted something I couldn't give you because I didn't understand what it was. Her eyes welled with tears, an unusual display of vulnerability. I wanted to matter to you, to be important in your life, not just the person you wrote checks to when you felt obligated. And stealing from me? Trying to take my house? How would that have made you matter to me? She looked down at her hands. Harold has a gambling problem. Has for years. I've covered for him, paid his debts when I could. But it got out of control after his surgery. When he was home all day with nothing to do but play online poker, we were about to lose everything. So you decided to take from me instead. It wasn't like that at first, she insisted. We really did come to help you. But being in that house, seeing everything you had that we would never have. Harold started talking about how you owed us, how we deserve some security after raising you. It made sense when he said it. I listened, feeling a complex mix of empathy for her situation and anger at her choices. That doesn't excuse what you tried to do. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding and hurt between us. I can't have you in my life right now, I finally said. Maybe not ever again. The trust is broken, and I'm not sure it can be repaired. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I thought you might say that. But I want you to get help, I continued. Both of you. I've arranged for Harold to speak with an addiction counselor who specializes in gambling problems. And there's a support group for family members affected by gambling addiction that meets at the community center. I'll pay for 6 months of counseling if you'll go. Her head snapped up in surprise. Why would you do that after what we did? Because despite everything, I don't want to see you destroy yourselves, I answered honestly. And because I need to know I've done everything I reasonably could, even if we can't have a relationship going forward. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't there yet, and might never be. But it was a recognition that her behavior, however inexcusable, came from a place of deep pain and dysfunction that deserved compassion, even as I maintained firm boundaries for my own protection. We parted ways shortly after. The conversation had reached its natural conclusion. I didn't know if she would accept the offer of counseling or if Harold would address his addiction. That was their choice to make. My responsibility was to myself and my own healing process. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life on new terms. My relationship with my brother Tom strengthened as we connected more regularly, sharing our experiences and supporting each other in establishing healthy boundaries with our mother. His wife Diane and their children became a source of joy in my life, the kind of family connection based on mutual respect and genuine care that I had always craved. I also found unexpected family in the community I built around myself. Lisa continued as a friend long after her professional duties ended. Jessica and her husband included me in their holiday gatherings. My colleagues at the architecture firm rallied around me during my recovery, bringing meals and keeping me connected to projects I cared about. As spring arrived, bringing new growth and possibility, I stood in my garden planting flowers, my body strong enough now for physical work. The house behind me was truly mine again, reclaimed from the painful memories of those weeks of exploitation. I had changed the locks, redecorated the guest rooms, and cleansed the space with new energy and purpose. The most important change, though, was within me. I had learned that family is not defined by blood or obligation, but by respect, reciprocity, and genuine care. I had discovered the strength to set boundaries and the wisdom to recognize when relationships were toxic rather than nurturing. And I had found that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to walk away from connections that cause harm, no matter how society pressures us to maintain them in the name of family. As I patted the soil around a newly planted rosebush, I thought about how healing resembles gardening. It requires removing what's damaged, nurturing what's healthy, and having the patience to wait for new growth. My journey wasn't over, but I was tending to my life with greater wisdom, now cultivating relationships that helped me flourish rather than those that depleted me. The house I had worked so hard for was once again a sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I had learned to establish in all areas of my life. And though the path to this peace had been painful beyond what I could have imagined, I wouldn't trade the clarity and strength I had gained. I have learned that sometimes you must lose what you thought was essential to discover what you truly need. Family can be chosen. Boundaries are acts of self-love. And the most important home you will ever build is the one within yourself, a place where you honor your own worth and refuse to allow anyone, even those who share your blood, to diminish it. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to distance yourself from toxic family members? How did you rebuild your sense of safety and trust afterward? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose their own well-being, even when family is involved. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the family that matters most is the one that treats you with love and respect, regardless of DNA.